Hello, everybody. We want to welcome everyone to our webinar today. The webinar is entitled B2B Identity, where workforce and customer identity collide. Two major and potentially competing priorities stand out when you're considering identity management for business partners like retailers, franchisees, agencies, and distributors. The priorities are, of course, one, providing for security and managing risk for high-risk external users on the one hand, but also satisfying their demanding expectations when it comes to how easily they can be onboarded and granted access on the other hand. How organizations achieve excellence and strike balance between these two priorities are top of mind and a concern for many business leaders today. To provide perspective from the lens of their many years of experience and insight, I have the privilege of introducing our distinguished panelists today. First up is Dana Reed. Dana is a SailPoint Distinguished Solution Engineer and lead sales liaison for SailPoint's AI-led intelligent identity product offering. Dana has over 20 years of experience in identity management, having applied IGA experience in most vertical markets, spanning the full breadth of SDLC responsibilities for strategy, development, sales, and delivery. And next, I want to introduce Jennifer Kraxner. Jennifer is the Vice President of Market Strategy at SecZetta. Jennifer is a former counterintelligence agent and has served for the last decade as an advisor to organizations regarding their identity security and risk programs. She has performed assessments and guided identity programs in a variety of industries, including healthcare, higher ed, financial services, hospitality, and technology. We've got a lot of people in attendance right now, and we're privileged to be able to welcome Dana and Jennifer. Dana and Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ed. Great intro and really good kind of summary of what our topic is today. You know, we're gonna do a quick run through for the next 30 minutes or an hour about B2B identity specifically. And I think the first thing to really understand is what do we mean when we're talking B2B identity, and Ed really went through a little bit of this, right? There is definitely a distinction between what we need to do from a B2B perspective in identity, and it's very different from what we might consider as traditional workforce identity and traditional customer or consumer identity. And the reason is just that, you know, we're looking at these different types of relationships that businesses have with other businesses, and hence those sorts of relationships drive really what kind of access users might need from those businesses, whether that's retailers or franchises, distributors, agencies. We even, looking in the healthcare field, start thinking about affiliates like clinics or community connect type use cases. And I think the key differentiator between B2B identity and workforce identity in particular is the fact that workforce is really about giving people access in order to do their jobs within an organization. B2B identity starts really migrating into how you know, an organization actually makes money with their relationship with these other businesses. And that's how it kind of merges into that customer identity space, right? When we think about B2B identity, we're really looking at revenue generating business partners and how we allow them as sort of an enterprise or as a corporate entity. How do we allow them to actually help us to generate revenue and make money, similar to, you know, what a customer would do? Yet many of those B2B relationships also have a very significant consideration when it comes to security and risk. So when we start thinking about B2B relationships, we can't help but also talk about third-party risk and some of the risk that those relationships and the access that we're granting those other businesses introduces. So to start out, you know, we really, and Dana and I really wanted to talk a bit about what are the challenges that we see specific to B2B identity. We've had a lot of different conversations with many different types of organizations, and hear a lot of the same stories, hear a lot of the same challenges, and really are with two organizations that are trying to address those challenges with SecZetta and SailPoint. So the first thing that I'll kind of touch on here is a pretty obvious, really kind of user experience challenge when it comes to B2B identity. And that is just simply the headache of getting non-payroll, non-employed people on board at an organization. So we hear, I mean, I've talked to a lot of different franchise organizations, in particular in the services industry or hospitality or even education in many cases, where there is just a lot of headache when it comes to trying to onboard users from these external organizations, right? Trying to get a hotel worker onboarded because they need access to, say, a hospitality organization systems, right? And those headaches can certainly stem from merely being such a decentralized process. You have a franchise owner trying to onboard their employees into a system to get access to do their job, but they don't technically own that system, nor do they own the access to that system, right? And so some of those onboarding headaches do things like cause delay and frustration, delay in getting somebody to work, frustration on the part of these franchises, right? These customers, essentially, of these businesses. So there are probably some, and I know that there are some workarounds. Dana, I don't know if you want to kind of comment on some of the things that you've seen from the perspective of, hey, if it's really difficult to get folks onboarded, what sorts of security implications does that have for these franchises?
Well, I think it's interesting, right? I mean, there's a couple of swim lanes of issues at play here, right? I mean, one is simply just onboarding users and making sure that they have the proper access that they need on day zero. People like contractors, we're paying them by the hour to do a job, and the last thing you want to do is spend $250 an hour for someone to sit there and not have access to be able to do anything, right? So there's a very real cost in just being able to onboard these people and give them the access they need, and that's the wheelhouse of SailPoint, right? Looking at a new user coming in, understanding who they are and what they do, and then giving them the access that they need in real time so that they are enabled on day zero. What is difficult, and this is where I think the SecZetta SailPoint relationship is really interesting for us, is users are fluid, right? I mean, the use case of contractor to hire to contractor, partner vendor. I mean, people, you look at a university, you may be associated with a university from age 7 when you went to the football camp or whatever it is, right? So there's all kinds of different user populations that even obviously moving into B2B as well, but a user can be so many different things. So to have a SecZetta on one side to be able to vet these users, understand who they are, identity proof them, and then give them to us, like that correlation problem that we've dealt with for so long, essentially kind of starts to go away. And so by putting the best of both worlds together, you have much more of a synchrony of experience on the end user side as well, right? Their ability to say, I'm going to go work for company X through maybe through vendor Y, and have a very seamless experience, even for them, makes the onboarding process a whole lot easier. So there's an ROI, there's a brand equity, for lack of a better term, or brand experience. There's a lot of benefits that I think this relationship together can help out.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So another thing that brings to mind for me is, as things get more and more difficult I'm just going to give a specific example. If there is a franchise owner out there trying to get an employee onboarded with access, if that's a really difficult, process for them, they quite frequently might start doing things like, oh, I'm hiring a new employee. I'm just not going to go through that headache. Instead, I'm just going to have them use the access that I already had to jump through hoops to get for another employee, right? So we have these problems of these shared accounts and so forth. On the other hand, we also have that user experience, kind of, you know, what you were talking about, Dana, where if it's not easy for them to do, maybe they just decide they no longer want to be a partner of that particular organization. You know, if I'm you know, a Marriott hotel chain and it's such a headache to get people in, then maybe I'm going to switch and decide that I'm going to go be a part of the Hilton chain, right? So there's a competitive advantage to making that user experience really beneficial and really easy, and in particular when it comes to onboarding.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? When you look at even just the way data flows from one organization or from one product to the next, a lot of what we're doing as far as granting people access is based off of policy. And you could say, I mean, policy can be evaluated in many places, but in many cases it's role-based access control, whatever it is. But that policy is vetted against attributes being correct. And so to have a trusted source of users, of user populations, from an identity perspective, users can come in from multiple authoritative sources. I mean, I remember the University of Virginia had, I think it was 26 authoritative sources of where their users would come from. To have a source like SecZetta that has trusted user information really allows us to say, look, this source is authoritative, the data has been vetted, the attribute values have been vetted, and that then allows us to have trust in what access we then grant our users as they go downstream. And so not only are they enabled on day zero, they're actually enabled in a way that is trust verified, for lack of a better term. And I think what also is interesting, and I know Jennifer's got a slide on this in a second, but when you look at the join, remove, or leave your life cycle of users, I mean, for all the users we onboard, we will at some point offboard all of them. And traditionally, it's been very, very difficult to have trusted data around when a user has expired, when they've left, when they've been extended for a certain period of time. Like all of those processes, they're ancillary to identity management, right, from a SailPoint perspective, but they do drive authoritative attribute values, which then directly drive what access a user has or doesn't have, what accounts may be enabled or may be disabled, moving user accounts to different OUs. Even the contractor to hire scenario, right, has very distinct implications of what users have from an access perspective.
And that brings up another very important challenge that we run into, particular in B2B, right? Is the onboarding is one very important piece, obviously, but as you mentioned, Dana, the need to make sure that information we have about those identities is true and accurate and updated is specifically challenging for B2B identity. And that's, obviously that's something that SecZetta is very focused on helping. That's a challenge we're focused on helping to solve is, hey, let's make sure that we can trust the identity data that we have about these technically external users, right? Make sure that we can trust that information and make sure that updates are done in a timely way, and that we hold the right people accountable for making those sorts of updates. Because in a B2B environment, there can be a lot of, clamoring to get someone onboarded and get them access for just those reasons you talked about, right? Get them to work, get them, actually serving the purpose that we're hiring them for. But nobody kind of cares at the point in time they get that access when that needs to stop, when that needs to end. But it's super important from a compliance perspective, obviously, to make sure that everybody, that we know when an employee is terminated from a franchise, that we know when an agent is no longer representing a particular insurance carrier, that we know when a clerk is no longer working at a service station, right? Some of these things are incredibly challenging for these B2B organizations because they just don't have a means to ask the right people or collect the updates from the right people. And then, of course, SecZetta does that in a way that provides those sorts of updates to SailPoint so they can run those join, remove, reliever processes like you were talking about, Dana.
Good point.
And I guess one other thing I'll bring, another thing that's really prevalent in the B2B world is relationship complexity, right? And what do I mean by that? So when we think about workforce identity, and you think about the way that employees are managed, for example, in an employee identity and their access is managed, we can typically understand an employee's relationship with an organization based on pretty simple hierarchical type terms, right? This is their direct manager, this is the department they work for, and this is their job function. But when it comes to some of these B2B relationships, we're working with kind of matrixed relationships in many cases. So an external person might work at a particular franchise location for an organization, but then that franchise location has a particular franchise owner, and that it also belongs to a particular district. And oh, by the way, they also have not only a franchise owner who should be kind of ultimately responsible for their engagement and their employment there, but they also probably have a direct supervisor who probably also needs to have a little bit of involvement in that. So the relationships can become fairly complex fairly quickly in B2B. And the important thing that we need to address relative to that is, their access should be highly dependent on some of these relationships. The access and their identity and the access that identity has within an organization needs to be dependent on some things, not only based on what location they work at might determine what sorts of systems or what type of access they get to systems, but also that their manager probably needs to, their direct manager probably needs to be responsible for things like access certifications that needs to be in, SailPoint has to be informed about this. Who's going to come in and do the access review for this person? Who's going to tell me whether the access that they have is still appropriate or not? So that relationship complexity really has downstream implications when it comes to identity and access. And a couple other, I'll kind of jump into one other piece here, compliance, right? When it comes in particular to external users, when we think about internal workforce, right, compliance requirements like signing acceptable use policy or accepting something like that before getting access to systems, or HIPAA requirements, HIPAA compliance requirements, all the different things that come under regulatory compliance. It's a little bit easier to gather some of that when you're talking about an internal employee, right? When it comes to these B2B relationships and external users, compliance requirements become much more, I guess, scattered, right? It's not a centralized process to necessarily collect that stuff, and it's absolutely not a centralized, not easy to make a centralized repository that tells us that these compliance requirements have been met, that an external person has accepted a remote access agreement if they're getting remote access, that we've proven who that person is, right? There's no I-9 process, for example, like there is in the States that says, hey, come in, show us, prove who you are before we give you kind of that employee designation within our organization. When we're dealing with external users and external identities, we quite frequently need to be able to do things like remotely verify some of these things. And we need to be able to do that before granting them access to systems, right, to meet all of those compliance requirements. So that's a big challenge when it comes to these more distributed users and identities, folks that are all over the country or all over the world. Being able to collect that stuff really has to come down to collecting it from the source, number one, right, and not a lot of back and forth trying to get things emailed, or I think people even are faxing that sort of thing right now, which is kind of crazy. But certainly a challenge that has to be addressed. Anything to add there, Dana?
Well, yeah, I think the last two on relationship complexity and compliance, like I kind of hit this from a different definition of some of those words. And what I mean by that is what we're looking for on the SailPoint side, as example, our file access manager product or our cloud access manager product, we are looking for what access or visibility do users have to things like sensitive data, those types of things. And so from a compliance perspective, when you're looking at these non-employee type B2B users, one of the interesting, I think, challenges organizations face is, we're giving these people that are essentially trusted entities from an outside organization access to some of our most, in many cases, our most sensitive documents or whatever it may be. In many cases, those people don't have the motivation from a company perspective to abide by a lot of those security agreements, and so they'll take things from a private reading room and move it over to their personal folder, or they'll do whatever. And we see a lot of that from a visibility perspective. And this is really where I think, the benefit of both products together really is very valuable, and that, we can go ahead and identify who has access to that sensitive data, but we can bring it back to a trusted source of identity to say, all right, this is an external user who belongs to this group of people managed by this person, and therefore we have a mitigation process, if you will, when we see someone that is out of compliance or doing something nefarious that they shouldn't do. We now know who to go to, and we can have our workflows look for perhaps the partner owner or whoever it is to go ahead and start mitigating these things. So it's definitely a different idea of what compliance means and what relationship complexity means. But in my world, it's all about the relationship gets complex because their motivations are different, right? Their motivations are more reliant or true to their employer, not true to their client, and we see their actions actually work in different ways.
That's a very, very good point. And it actually is a great segue into kind of the next two challenges that are really prevalent, which are, audit findings and ultimately data breaches.
Yeah.
Because these are the types of things that, number one, they're real challenges, real things that these organizations are going through, getting audit findings that say, hey, you can't even tell me who has access to your systems, right? Particularly when it comes to an external user, from an external user or B2B non-employee third-party type standpoint, right? And that those are audit findings that cost a lot of money and really introduce significant risk that can easily lead to data breaches. And being able to really keep an eye on a lot of that stuff that you were talking about, Dana, being able to identify when people maybe aren't accessing things the way that they should be doing, or that they're not treating information with the right sort of privilege that they need to be treating it. That's key when it comes to avoiding these data breaches, avoiding a lot of the really negative impact of not properly controlling these identities and the access that they have.
Great point.
So these are some of the key challenges that we're really running into, that we're hearing a lot about, that we're working very hard as partners, SailPoint and SecZetta and IC Consult from an advisory perspective. We're working really hard to solve these challenges. And I think a lot of these challenges, particularly when you're talking about B2B identity, they're different challenges than when you're talking about workforce, right? When you're talking about employee identity. And there's a few reasons why they're very different. We talked about the fact that, there are certain similarities with workforce, but some of the very key differences and the key considerations we need to keep in mind when we're dealing with B2B. One of the things it really comes down to is there has to be this balance, right, between security and user experience or efficiency for these external organizations. And I know that's always a consideration, no matter what you're doing from an identity or cybersecurity perspective, is there has to be a balance. You've got to enable the business, but in a secure way. but there is a little, there's definitely a little heavier lean towards let's make sure that as partners we make their experience good, right? And you know, really just making sure that we can represent those complex relationships that we talked about, being able to represent it not only at an identity layer and at the higher identity level, but also at that kind of access level, like Dana was talking about. Some other very key considerations is, like I said, ease of use and user friendliness, right? We have to make it easy for these external businesses, for these external organizations to do the right thing when it comes to their employee access and the way that they maintain the life cycle of those employees. So, and ease of use comes into play. I know I'll speak from the SecZetta side. We approach this from the perspective of let's make sure, number one, that we have a really, you know, obviously have a very kind of friendly user interface when it comes time to for a franchise owner or an external vendor manager or somebody external to come in and actually manage the access or the life cycle of their folks. We make it easy. We make it very obvious what they're supposed to do. We make it simple to onboard someone. We make it simple to terminate them. We make it simple to update those the details about that person. And we also kind of proactively reach out and tell them, you know, when they need to do it. And Dana, I'll let you kind of comment on that also from a SailPoint perspective.
I mean, look, I think what we want to do when I look at if I sum this up or distill this down, identity, I think I had a conversation about this morning. What does identity look like as we progress over the next 10 years? It's about seamless identity, right? It's about onboarding, offboarding, moving users in a way in which it is seamless to the user, it is frictionless. And I think having the right applications in play are part of creating that frictionless experience for users. Once you do that, you open yourself up to a lot of other interesting opportunities, right? If you have frictionless identity, then that means losing access and getting access back should be very, very simple, which means that we have more of an opportunity for things like zero standing privileges because we can give access back as fast as we can take it away. And the user doesn't even know any better, right? So something is it's the old Steve Jobs, right? Something's as beautiful at how it works as how it looks. And I think when you look at this relationship together, the ease of use is part of what makes this relationship great. And I think also what makes it unique in the marketplace compared to whatever else is out there.
Yeah, and it's not only kind of that end user ease of use, but it also is that kind of administrative ease as well, which is a whole other topic I think we could really get into. Yeah, and you know, one thing we haven't really talked a lot about that is so specific really to B2B and to external users is this need to have appropriate visibility and control of data and users, right, of identity data and of user access. Because there are certainly privacy implications when it comes to the data that we collect on employees, but also, you know, specifically on the data we collect on people that are not our employees. And being able to appropriately designate who has visibility to that information and who has control of that information, who has control of you know, when somebody's onboarded or offboarded, who has control over who gets to request access for those people. Being able to very prescriptively say only this data is visible and to only these people is a really important consideration when it comes to B2B, and definitely something that both SailPoint and SecZetta are able to hone in on and really narrow down in the right way.
I agree. I think, look, communication matters, and how you communicate and who you communicate to. Putting the right decision points in front of the right people. I mean, we look at it from even a role-based access control perspective. I want to dissect roles in a way that the owner of the role is the person closest to that piece of access. It's the same thing when you look at the B2B identity as well. It's like, who is the person or people or group that are managing those folks, and let's make sure that you have a permissions model, a security authorization model that maps to that. And a lot of, I mean, let's face it, a lot of third-party applications are homegrown, and they don't have that level of protection or security that something like a SecZetta does. And so, a lot of what they're doing is replacing homegrown systems, and there's a reason why they're replacing them, right? Because companies are recognizing the cost and the risk associated with what they built is a risk to the business, and bringing in someone that, it's the classic, like, if you think hiring a professional is expensive, try hiring an amateur. And I think we're seeing that a lot of times in third-party type software applications, as well as third-party identity applications. It's the same thing, with SailPoint and with SecZetta. That's why, taking the best of both worlds, two leaders in their spaces, and bringing them together really shows a lot of synergy to the business.
Hey, Dana, Jennifer, let me interrupt you for just a moment. There's a question that's come in, and it could be interesting to other folks who are on the webinar. And the question is this: can you make it simple for me? As I evaluate solutions out there, why is the SailPoint and SecZetta partnership better than other solutions that claim to solve B2B identity? I know you've touched on it from various aspects, but just kind of as like a definitive statement, from what our listener is wanting to hear.
I love that question.
Go ahead. I'll let you go. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I think the key, and the next slide, I'm just going to skip over this last guy because I do think that the next slide speaks well to this. If I can get it to advance there. The key here is number one, it really goes to what Dana was just saying. There have been a lot of different organizations that have tried to solve this problem by building their own solution, or truthfully by kind of cobbling things together in potentially some technology that they already have. And we could name a handful of those. We won't go into it, but the truth is that SecZetta was built to do this. We were intentionally built to fill a gap that everybody was trying to fill with cobbled together solutions, home built stuff, customization of solutions that weren't built for it. And we were specifically built to maintain identity data for third parties, B2B identities, external folks, people that you're not going to go find in your HR system, right? And the reason that it makes so much sense alongside SailPoint is SailPoint was specifically built to rely on that sort of data, right? This particular diagram really talks about the fact that SailPoint is so good at controlling and providing visibility of identities and access, right? All the things that Dana has talked about, and I know he'll talk about a little bit more. And it does it really, really well. And it's able to do that. We always talk about this. I mean, one of the things that I hear more than anything is garbage in, garbage out when it comes to data, right? You have to get your data right to feed those sorts of systems in order for those systems to work kind of as good as they can. And the data that goes into SailPoint is authoritative identity data. The data that SailPoint relies on is that authoritative identity data. SecZetta is built to collect and maintain that for these external systems. Do you want to add to that answer there, Dana?
Yeah, if you want one sentence, I think when you take two best in breed vendors and put them together, you get a best in breed solution. And so, to whoever asked the question, if hopefully that's the easiest of answers, right? It is, I think it's two pros working together that do their jobs great, are leaders in the space, but also we have a relationship with each other that I think is unique compared to other partners we have in the space. And so just like what our relationship with someone like ServiceNow for ticket integration, it's much deeper than it is with other people. Our relationships with BeyondTrust, CyberArk, et cetera. SecZetta is one of those vendors that we work very closely with and have a very close relationship. In fact, a lot of ex-SailPoint folks work at SecZetta, right? So we really all know each other very well. And I think that makes it easy for us to work together, but it also makes it easy for us to communicate and to really share where things are working and where things can be improved. And so that's just one of those unique things around, it's abstract beyond the fact that, like, can we get the bits from point A to point B in a better and easier and smoother fashion? Absolutely. But I think the abstract actually is one of those catalysts that causes that to happen.
Yeah, that's
great answer, y'all. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, and I think one of the big keys here is exactly what Dana just referenced, right? We work really well together because we know what our strengths are too.
Yeah.
We know why we were built. We know what our purpose is. So we can come in and we talk about this we really are kind of a team. We are one team when we go have these conversations with customers and with different organizations, which is, we are definitely here. SecZetta is definitely here to get that identity data in the right way from the right people, collecting all of that, and we have some things listed here on this diagram as well, but talking about things like being able to do that identity proving, being able to do that collaborative data collection, self-registration type workflows, right? And very importantly, particularly in the B2B space, we do, looking at risk scoring. And I think risk is a really interesting topic when you talk about what SecZetta does for risk and what SailPoint does for risk. They complement each other so well, right? SecZetta is really looking at risk from the perspective of, I have a person that I'm allowing access to my resources, right? What are they doing for me? What do I know about this person? What vendor or what external organization are they coming in from? What job function are they performing for us? Where are they working from? There's all sorts of things about the person themselves that should really inform, maybe a better way to say it is, should really inform how much we trust that person, how much trust we just grant them at the point in time that they're getting access to our systems. Whereas SailPoint, right, takes a different perspective when it comes to risk. All right, we've let this person in, they're here, right? How risky is the access that we've granted them? How risky are they with what we're giving them within our organization? And so it's a little bit of it is such a complementary view on risk, and certainly those two types of risk can work together so that we really have a good sense for the level of trust we have for a person and for their identity and their access, and whether that sort of trust should be maintained, like retained at that specific level, right?
I think you're right. These are complementary disciplines, right? And you can even see it in our products, right? How we have a non-employee lifecycle management capability, but when you compare it to what a SecZetta does, it's not even close, right? And that's because the complexity of onboarding a third-party B2B type of user, the vetting process, you walk yourself into a whole new bag of worms when you're doing that. And you guys focus on that. That is your core competency. Our core competency is to sit downstream from that. But there's also a trust relationship. The trust relationship says what SecZetta has done, how they have vetted their users, how they have vetted the user attributes, we trust. and thus we can do our job because what they're telling us is correct. And
Dana, just a quick interrupt. This is for everybody to mark their calendar. This is one of the very, very few times you will hear a guy from a product company actually admit weakness and acknowledge strength from a partner. So we'll all note that, Dana. Thank you for your candor there.
No problem. But it is true. You're right, and I think that's why you make that investment, right? That's why you decide that these two vendors together are accretive. And it goes back to the question earlier, like, if I could choose from a lot of folks, why do I choose you? And I think that's the answer, right? Is that we both recognize what our strengths are. We recognize that we're going to play to our strengths, and we recognize that we're going to rely on other leaders to facilitate the parts that we may be weak in, or we need to look for others from a partnership perspective to really complete that chain.
And Dana and Jennifer, just to echo your all statements, representing IC Consult, we're a global company, and we've been around 25 years, and we focus only on identity and access management. And as you can imagine, we have reach and contact with any number of folks who do the exact same solution that you all have talking about. And this is for the audience, there is no other solution, there's no other partnership other than SailPoint and other than SecZetta that we trust to solve this particular problem. So Dana, to your point, Jennifer, to your point, you guys are built and wired to partner together to solve this unique problem.
And I think, ultimately, what are we trying to do? And I know that Dana and I kind of come from the same perspective here, right? We're trying to solve a problem for customers, for organizations. We're trying to solve it, and we're trying to solve it in the best way possible, right? And if SecZetta isn't the best and only solution to solve it, of course, I want to make sure that we're, having conversations about what other pieces need to come in order to truly solve the problem, and again, to do it in the right way. And it's as product companies, we really come into this maybe with a little bit different a different strategy, I guess. My history is on the delivery side. I've worked with a lot of organizations trying to actually solve the problem as a deliverer of a solution. I want to see it successful, and this is why the partnership is so great, is because it is successful. We've been successful at many organizations filling this gap and doing what we're talking about here. So
it's, in speaking selfishly, right? If I'm going to sit downstream from someone, it's in my best interest to partner with and promote the people that I feel do the best job in front of me, right? And I think also, if you're going to sit in front of someone, and you're really only as good as how SailPoint can then take that information and go enable those users, right? So we both have somewhat of our reputation is actually reliant on the other. And it's just like my dad used to say, it's like, if you hang out with losers, you're going to, no matter how smart you are, you're going to be a loser. If you hang out with winners, you can be a winner as well. And I think that's what we choose to do inside of SailPoint is we choose to hang out with winners. We choose to identify the leaders in the space, and we recognize that if we can promote them, if we can work well with them, they actually make us doing our job better as well. And so there's undoubtedly there's a selfish aspect to this, but the result of that selfishness is better service to our clients, getting people the access they need when they need it, and taking it away when they don't. But it's all relying on a catalyst, right? And that catalyst for us is SecZetta. They do it better. They can provide that catalyst, that event, in a better trusted way than anybody else can, and that's why we choose to work with them.
same, absolutely. Couldn't have said it better.
Oh, problem solved. Thanks, guys, for joining.
That was really kind of the extent of our presentation. I do want to, open up if there are other questions. I don't know, Ed, if there's anything else coming through, but we're absolutely happy to answer additional questions. It's been wonderful to kind of present to you all today. And yeah, Ed.
Yeah, I don't see any other questions at this time. Let's wait another couple seconds that might not be another question that pops up.
All right.
Okay. Based on the fact that there's no further questions, Dana and Jennifer, thanks for sharing your insights and experience with the audience. We've all benefited by learning a little bit more about gaining that critical balance between security and risk management and user experience for third parties, and specific ways that your joint solution stands out in addressing the problem. If something, and this is for the audience, if something said today resonates with you and you'd like to learn more and benefit from the global partnership and deep collaboration between SailPoint, SecZetta, and IC Consult, feel free to reach out to the contact info on your screen. Or better yet, come join us at SailPoint Navigate in Austin, October 4th through the 5th. We'll be there in person. We're happy to spend as much time with you as you'd like, and we're hoping that that's an option that you consider. Otherwise, yeah, feel free to reach out to the contact information you see there. So for the audience and for our distinguished panelists, thank you for attending, and thank you for putting this on. So have a good day, y'all. Until next time.
Thanks, Ed.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye.